Rocky Mountain Smiths members, and welcome to the December digital demo and holiday gift exchange. This month, I'm going to be talking about wrapped collars. I learned this at an RMS conference from Gordo Stonington, and this process is based off of the project in the Francis Whitaker cookbook and discusses how to wrap collars in that book if you need it for additional reference. Furthermore, I'm going to just be showing how to measure, wrap, and make those collars, as well as a bending jig that I used under the hydraulic press on a corner bracket that I put up around my pizza oven. Thank you again for joining us for this digital demo, and please enjoy.
So I got kind of lucky in the design here. We have a 1/4 inch here, we have a 1/4 inch at each of these thicknesses, 1/4 and a half here. So in all, each 3 of these points that is going to end up with a collar has the same perimeter. In order to make the collar, you add up the perimeter that you're going to wrap around. So for example, on this corner, it's half plus a 1/4 plus half down plus 3/4 back across the bottom and up a half, which comes out to, I believe, 2 1/2. And then my material that I'm going to use for a collar is a 1/4 of an inch thick. Therefore, I need to multiply the thickness of the collar material by 2 1/2, which gives me another 5/8. So I've cut my collar material at 3 1/8 inches long. And that should be enough to wrap around each of the 3 points and close up on that. So next we'll go over the anvil. We're going to do a small scarf on each end of the collar because I want the ends to overlap as opposed to just butting up against each other. I prefer that appearance. The other thing I want to talk about is the design layout has changed a bit. This hole I punched about 1 inch high. I saw a scale spot and thought it was my center punch mark and punched the hole there. So I've had to kind of shift and rotate the whole design over a little bit. It's an asymmetric design. This center piece here no longer runs through the diagonal of my corner, but I'll live with it rather than starting completely over. This is a one-off bracket. It doesn't have to match one. So I'm going to keep working with what I have here.
I realize that starting out, not everyone has a bandsaw, so another quick and easy way to cut some material is using a cold cut. This has a very blunt cutting edge and is a technique that I was reminded of while I was visiting some smiths in Budapest. Start forging the tapers on these collars. I'm just going to do it here on this anvil block. I'm hoping it'll give a better view for you on the camera. I'm going to have my material flat here on the end, on the block, right up at the edge of the block, or what might be an anvil's edge. I'm going to have my hammer coming down at a pretty blunt angle, pretty steep angle to create a blunt, kind of shorter taper on this end of the collar. I'll flip it around and do the other end, try to give you a different view of the camera, as well as show you a trick for problem solving. Because on this collar, since the ends will overlap, we want the ends, each end of the collar for the bevel to be facing in opposite directions. And sometimes it's easy to get that mixed up, and it's real quick and simple to fix. So I'll show you that as well. Alright, so right here at the edge, coming with pretty steep flows, form my taper, and then I'll turn it up, adjust the width real quick, couple flows to clean it up, and that gives the taper. Alrighty. So here's the setup. Bevel from before is facing down. I put some white chalk on the side that I want up. And I'm going to take a heat. I'll come back to the edge and forge this taper. there's the bevel forged in. You can see my bevels are on opposite sides. I'm going to go ahead and pretend like my bevels were on both sides and show you how you might fix that. Obviously, I've got it on both sides. So, flip it over. Knock that bevel over to the side you want it on. You get a little bit of growth each time, and I've lost some thickness in the material going back and forth here so many times. But now you can see right in here I've lost some thickness down at the end. But that's okay. This will all get cleaned up. I'll go over it with a little hand flatter or something as I close up the collar.
If you end up with your bevels on the same side, I wanted to show you how to get the bevels on opposite sides so they will properly overlap when you close the collar. It's very important to just do this at a really high heat to push that bevel over.
Very simple solution for a problem that I guarantee none of us have ever made before, and definitely not on this project.
Here I'm setting up to bend the first leg of the collar. You can see that I have clamped the bar in the vise such that it is 3/8 of an inch away from the center line of the collar material. This is because the side labeled A in the drawing is 3/4 of an inch wide. This setup will lead to the beveled ends of the collar overlapping on the side opposite of A.
That here in the vise, nice and snug. And now I'll come in with my hammer and I'm going to bend this leg over. Try to keep this leg square. So now I have the first leg of my staple. And I went a little too far. It's not quite a 90 there. I'll see if I can fix that really quick at the anvil. Alright, so now I want to bend the second leg, and I'm going to do this here in the vise. What you need is some kind of spacer bar. It's the width that you want your face of your collar to be. So for my case, this is 3/4 of an inch thick. And I'm going to clamp this in the vise like so. So that it'll allow me to bend the leg over into that staple or C shape. And it's got to be a long enough bar that this leg does not impinge on the vise jaw. So now I have my staple bent around. We're going to try and get that a little tighter there over at the anvil just by hitting like this. So now I have my collar. So let's go over to the layout table and see how this guy fits. So this collar just drops into this slot, and the scroll fits up in there. And then once I have all three collars made, the centerpiece finished, I'll put all three collars on, get everything aligned, and start closing up the collars.
I really goofed here on the video recording and forgot to hit the start button. I had my girlfriend kindly helping me out on all the recording prior to this, so you're only going to get to see one collar getting closed up. Sitting on the anvil, you can see on the right side, I have a hold down, keeping everything held in place and a couple shims tucked underneath so that not only are the collars sitting on the anvil's surface, but also that centerpiece and the scrolls are supported by the shim. Here I'm starting the heat with the torch down at the first bends that I made at the base of the collar and using some tongs to crimp it in. What this is doing is getting the collar tight around that half-inch side and starting to close it up. Here I'm heating the first leg to be closed. This is the bevel that is facing outwards on the collar right now, so that when you bend it over, the bevel is facing up, and that way when the second leg closes, the downward facing bevel will lay flush against it, and you should have one smooth surface on the back side of the collar. Closing up that first leg of the collar, the centerpiece slid out, so I used a punch up against the rivet of the flower to push the whole centerpiece back into the proper position before heating the second leg of the collar with the torch, getting ready to just bend that over. Starting out here, closing the collar with the hammer, I was having some issues. The hammer was hitting on the scroll. So I grabbed a little hand flatter to help close up that scroll, but as you can see, it knocked the whole piece loose from the hold fast, so we're going to start over again. Ideally, I'd be doing this setup on a heavier duty fab table, but at this time I haven't finished building that, so I'm stuck working on the anvil. I don't like doing this just because of the localized torch heats hitting on the face of the anvil, and in terms of tool longevity in life, I'd like to avoid doing that. Here you can see the presentation side of the finished corner bracket and how the ends of the collar have been hidden on the back side. Pictured here is the next piece that I'll be creating. This is a little mounting bracket that holds the entire frame into the corner. There are 4 iterations shown here as I was figuring out the tooling for this portion of the project. In the center is the actual tool that I used in the hydraulic press that fits on the bottom. A hot bar is set on top, and a 1/2-inch bar is driven down from the top to form the little U-bracket. This is the first run, starting with a 1/2-inch square bar first to push in the bracket, but the 1/2-inch square bar isn't tall enough to drive the hot steel all the way to the bottom of the tooling. Here's the second run, going to start with a piece of the 1/2-inch by 1 that's the outer portion of the frame. This will push the little bracket all the way to the bottom of the jig. I will then switch to a 1/2-inch square bar in the same spot, and this allows the press to push the bottom flanges flush with the top surface of that jig. I paused the frame here so you can see how before I put in the 1/2-inch square bar, the bracket hasn't seated all the way in the tooling, so once I insert that square bar and push down with the press, it'll flatten out that corner. Looking at the brackets in the top right and bottom left corner, you can see that the vertical section of the bracket has become significantly thinner than the horizontal tabs. This is because the tooling I built is actually too narrow for these brackets, and I'm drawing and stretching the material down into the tooling. The gap in the pictured jig should be 1 inch, a 1/4 inch plus a 1/4 inch for the thickness of the 2 vertical legs of the bracket, plus 1/2 inch for the gap in the middle.